I don't gatekeep. Here's a step-by-step of everything I use that helped my makeup last that long. First step is obviously Easy Blur Primer. I feel like a lot of people are kind of misusing this product. You have to use 2 finger lengths of the primer, just like that, kind of like you would with a sunscreen, and you're really gonna just press it in. By the way, they asked us to show up with our eye makeup done, so we're just going to focus on the base. This is a smoothing blurring primer, and even though it's a smoothing primer, I love that it doesn't feel super thick. I feel like it's usually the silicone blurring primers that feel like too much for my skin, but this one feels really nice. Next is the Easy Blur foundation. I use the shade Latte. I'm just going to go straight on my face. I do 1 stripe there, 1 here, 1 on my forehead. This foundation does have niacinamide. If you're sensitive to niacinamide, it's in here. If you're not sensitive to niacinamide, it's not really a reason to avoid it. To blend this in, we use the Huda Beauty Face Base brush. I absolutely love this brush. It's a nice, dense, dome-shaped brush. I always recommend bouncing your brush to blend in your foundation instead of swiping it. When you swipe it, you can end up with streaks, and it just doesn't blend as well as it does when you bounce it. I feel like bouncing it also helps work the product into your skin so that it doesn't just sit on top. It honestly gives the same kind of finish that a beauty blender would, but I prefer brushes because they're much easier to clean. This is the best shade match I have had in a very long time. I'm usually a light medium with a neutral undertone. I have a hard time finding foundations that fit that. At this step here, when I'm blending in the foundation, I really like to take my time to work it in. Don't rush through this. I know sometimes you're in a rush, but if you have a few extra minutes, just take your time and work it into your skin. I promise it makes a difference. So that's just the foundation, and my skin already looks really good. Next is the Huda Beauty Full Filter Corrector. Corrector is in the shade Cherry Blossom. I don't usually use color correctors because I don't really feel like I need them. When I use this one at the masterclass, I kind of just placed it so that it's like a mid-tone blush kind of placement. I really like the look of blending your blush up under your eyes, so this kind of helps to make it a little bit more seamless. We didn't have brushes, so for this, I'm just using my finger. It just adds like a light little tinge of pink, but it's not super pigmented. Next is the Full Filter Concealer. This was my first time using it in the correct shade. I had one before, but it was way too light. This one is in the shade Coconut Flakes. Just placing it on the inner part of my eye here. A little bit here. Here. Because we were only using Huda Beauty products that we had there, I did skip out on a few steps that I normally do. So before placing my concealer and like anything in my under eye, I would normally do like a cream bronzer, but we're just gonna skip that because I'm gonna show you exactly what I did. I didn't have a brush to blend out my concealer, so I actually just used the powder puff that they gave us, which I feel like if you're in a pinch, sometimes you just gotta make it work with what you have. Always tapping it in to blend in. Never drag your products. If you drag your products, please try just tapping your products in when you blend them in. You're gonna notice a difference. And then in the under eye, I'm blending out the edge of the concealer first and taking that to the outer part of my eye, right beside the nose a little bit, just with what's on the puff, and then blending in the inner part. I normally use brushes for this, but I really just want to show you exactly how I did my makeup that day. With this, I'm really just making sure that I blend it into the corrector that I placed under my eye before. Concealer blended out. I feel like this is such a good color for me. It's brightening, but it's not too light. Next is blush filter in the shade Cotton Candy. This one is my favorite of the Huda Beauty liquid blushes. It's a really nice light pink. I like a lot of blush, so I do place a lot of it. I kind of do wish this was like a pump instead though. Probably because I like a lot of blush. To blend that in, I'm going to use the same face base brush and just bouncing and blending that into where the corrector was and taking that up a bit. I don't want it to look too blushy here. I'm just trying to make that like a seamless blend. Just going to tap with the side so I'm not adding too much pigment. With the puff that I used to blend out my concealer, I'm just going to go over the edge here. That's just going to help the blend. For me, the blush right now is pretty subtle, but I'm going to do something after to help intensify it. Next is setting powder. I usually use the shade Peach Pie, but that day I used the shade Pound Cake. I put some in the lid. I'm going to grab some on the puff. Always tap out the puff in your hand to make sure that the powder is like evenly distributed on it. Press that into my under eye first. I do get creasing on my under eyes because I have this like, it's called a Denny Morgan fold. So I do have that on my under eyes. I like to set it first because concealer starts to settle in there right away. I actually found that out recently that this line is called the Denny Morgan fold. It's common in people that have, I think it's inflammatory diseases. So like asthma, eczema, allergies, anything like that. Apparently it's common. I have asthma, eczema, and allergies, so makes sense. To set the rest of my face, because I didn't have brushes, I am going to use the powder puff. Normally I use a brush, but using a powder puff I feel like also helped with the longevity. I put less powder than I did with the under eyes, and just tapping that all over my face. Keep in mind, I do have oily skin, so my oils always come through no matter what I do. My whole face is set now, but setting my face with the powder kind of took down the blush. I do like more intense blush. So what I did was take some of the liquid blush on my hand, just put like however much you want. I take the face base brush, put some on the brush, just work it into there, and tap on top of that. This just helps to intensify the blush a little bit, and it brings a nice luminosity back to the skin. Perfect. See, look at the difference that adding it on top makes. In case you're wondering, it definitely still helps to have that first layer of blush underneath the powder because it just helps with longevity and it helps with building the intensity of the pigment. That's it for the base. No setting spray. I actually don't use setting spray that often. I feel like setting sprays are really good for taking down the powderiness of makeup if you want to add some like life back to your skin. But because I do have oily skin, I kind of prefer to just wait for those oils to naturally peek through. That brings everything together and I just like how it looks. Fixing spray is a different story. I do use those sometimes, but just not that often. That's literally everything I use and exactly how I did it that day. A few steps are different from my regular routine because we just didn't have those products, but the basis of what helped make my makeup last that long is all in here. This is now one of my favorite foundations. This powder has been a favorite of mine for years. I carry them in my makeup kit. And this primer is a great option if you want a blurring primer, but your skin doesn't really like silicone. But honestly, I've worn the foundation without the primer and it still wears so well for me. Any questions, let me know in the comments.